Welcome to the UNBC Forestry Club Podcast. This podcast is recorded at the Seaford radio station on campus from the traditional unceded territory of Clayton Tenay. You're probably listening from other places in BC or Canada or maybe around the world. We encourage you to recognize the traditional territory you get to learn, play, and live on. All right, welcome to the second episode of the UNBC Forestry Club Podcast. I'm your host, Hunda, and we have a special episode today prepared because our honored guest today needs no introduction to those working and studying at the University of Northern British Columbia, and he's been lecturing at UNBC for more than 24 years, and he has more than 100 published scientific papers, and he runs the Avian Behavior and Conservation Research Lab at UNBC. I was also very, very honored and fortunate to have him as my professor for my Bio 308. Oh, that's a big word.
Ornithology.
Etymology. Why don't you just do birds and mammals? Anyway, joining us today is the professor and the chair of the Department of Ecosystem Science and Management at UNBC. He not only teaches and supervises research, but he also deals with many emails from students and his faculty staff. He's the one that keeps the department running. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dr. Ken Otter to the UNBC Forestry Club Podcast.
Well, thank you. I'm really honored to be invited to do this, and it's fun to talk about this stuff.
We really appreciate you to spend the time. I know it's crazy busy for you right now, and really thank you for coming on and chat with us for a little bit.
This is the more interesting aspect of my jobs.
I'm glad. Although before we actually start, I need to ask a dumb question to start with, and
Sure.
This is actually it's been bugging me. I don't know how to do what to do with this. It's basically. Do I call you Ken or should I call you Dr. Otter on
No, just call me Ken.
Okay.
I'm pretty informal with this kind of stuff. I actually find it awkward when people call me Professor or Dr. Otter. So, we're pretty informal at UNBC. Most of the faculty prefer to be called by their first name. So,
yeah, I figured because podcast is like kind of formal but not too formal kind of platform.
Yeah.
So I figure I should ask every single professors, and when they come up, should I call you doctor?
Yeah, and it's always a good way to do it. You know, some people like the formality. Most of the faculty are pretty chill, so they prefer just going on a first name basis, right? So
that's awesome. Yeah. I get that vibe a lot at UNBC for sure. Well, let's just dive right into it, and maybe if you can tell me a little bit about yourself and how you become a PhD and how you become a professor at UNBC. How did you get into this teaching field?
By accident.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I never actually intended to go to graduate studies. I went through my undergraduate degree with the intention of actually going into scientific illustration. All through my high school, I was more interested in art than I was in sciences. I actually intended to just go into art school. And then about halfway through, probably about grade 9, grade 10,
right.
I found that I really enjoyed biology classes and the biology stuff. So I started kind of looking at careers that could potentially blend those two. And one of those is scientific illustration. It's the people who draw diagrams for textbooks and papers and things like that.
Right.
So I thought I looked into it, and I was never really in art. I was really much more interested in kind of realism and things like that. I was never really interested in kind of the very art type school type projects of abstract and things like this.
Right.
So I thought first I'd go and get a zoology degree, and then I would go back and take like a technical arts degree. So I went through, and I just found as I was getting ready for that I more and more enjoyed it. And I would get summer jobs working for, I worked for Department of Fisheries and Oceans for a summer. And then I got a job right after I graduated working for the Vancouver Aquarium as a naturalist. And so I spent all my time doing talks and learning about animals and stuff. And as I was doing this, I realized more and more that what really interested me was getting involved in research.
Right.
So I ended up making a decision to go back and get my master's degree.
At UBC or?
No, I actually went to Queens. I did my
Queens.
undergraduate at UBC because I grew up in Vancouver.
Okay.
But I did my I did my master's degree with a professor at Queen's University just because she had a project that I thought was really interesting and she was really supportive. So I went and I kind of applied to pretty much everywhere across the country and
Gotcha.
sort of talked to a whole bunch of different people about different things. But she seemed to be the one that I wanted to work with. So I went out to Queen's and started working in her lab. And I really, really enjoyed it. And, one thing kind of led to another, and that there was an opportunity to continue to do a PhD, and I was kind of interested. And so I kept going. And then I got my PhD and then wasn't sure what I wanted to do. So a job came up at a small college in Kansas that was mostly a teaching job. So I thought, well, see what that is like. And I got offered that job. So I went down to Kansas for a year and taught there and kind of realized it was a bit too much on the teaching side, too little on the research side. Yeah. And then I got offered a research fellowship to go to Europe. So I went and worked with a guy at the University of Nottingham. And just as I arrived there, he was moving to Copenhagen. So I went to Copenhagen and then
Nice.
And then so I did that, and then I was still kind of even keeping my options open. I applied for all sorts of different jobs. I applied for jobs in publishing and things like that, as well as a couple of professorial jobs, and just got offered this one. So it was it was never planned out. It was just keeping my options open, and sort of looking where opportunities presented themselves.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And that was back in 2000, right? Where you first came
Yeah,
to
I actually,
UBC.
1999 was when I first arrived here. So I'm almost at 25 years.
25 years.
Yeah. August will be my 25th year here.
Yeah.
So.
Because UBC, Queens, these are really big universities compared to UNBC, like quotation marks, smaller universities. Do you feel like any differences? Like,
I really like the smaller university situation. I actually find it's a lot easier probably to do research here simply because everybody knows everybody else. So it's really quick to sort of get things sorted out because, if you hit a roadblock with something, you know exactly who to go and talk to. You can usually get it resolved in 5-10 minutes.
Right.
So there's a lot of opportunities and a lot of benefits to doing here. For the first 6 years that I was here, all of my research was done like 50 meters behind the university. So like we basically just walked out the back door of the university and we're in our study site. So for me, it was an almost ideal situation. And at that time, the UNBC was really, really young.
Right.
And the opportunity to get involved with a brand new university where you could kind of recreate the model was huge. Like everybody wanted to work here when it first it opened up when I was doing my master's degree, and just about every single postdoc at Queen's applied for jobs here. Like everybody wanted to work here. So it was a really exciting time, and they were doing things that were really innovative and different. They were looking at a much more ecosystem integrated multidisciplinary approach. So it was really exciting place to be.
That's awesome. I like that you like your teaching experience here in research at UNBC, and as a student, I have the same experience too. And compared to the major, shouldn't say major, like the bigger university that have multiple buildings, like thousands, tens of thousands of people, students in the university, I feel like this one is super welcoming. And as a student, I feel like all the professors and faculty members, they just like, come talk to me, please. Yeah. I am available. I'm available. If you have questions, come talk to me in my office right here. My door is always open. Yeah. Come talk to me. As a student, I feel like that's a very special feeling for me because I know like all the professors super approachable. I can get a hold of them every time, whenever I want to. And sometimes they reply email 10 o'clock at night. I felt guilty because I make it work at 10 o'clock.
Yeah, my job as chair is to tell them you can actually turn your emails off and wait until the morning, right?
Yeah. So as a student, I really enjoying this environment. That all the doors are open, small, and then like people know everybody.
Well, and it's one of the things that really attracted me here in the first place is because at big universities, you tend to get siloed. Like what ends up happening, like when I was at Queen's, we had a biology department, and the biology department had its own building, and it was physically separated from every other department. So you never talk to people outside of your immediate discipline. So it kind of stagnates ideas. Whereas here, we intentionally have people that will be, when I first got here, my office was sandwiched in between like an environmental scientist and a physical geographer, and across the hall was a forester, and then there was somebody who was studying like social sciences, and the next person who was in the biology unit was like 3 or 4 offices away. So all your hallway chatter, you're talking to people outside your discipline, and it really promotes sharing ideas and getting new ideas and new approaches to doing things, right? And I think that's built into our forest ecology and management degree program, right? It is really kind of looking at forestry in a much bigger context, right? Like an ecosystem level management system and all the other demands on that forest, other than just its potential resource value in terms of timber, right? And so that ethos started here probably 20 years before it started anywhere else, right?
So because I have exactly the same feeling, because I came in with about 5 years experience working in the industry. So I was feeling myself walking in here, I know my stuff. And I was talking to my friends in the first podcast. As soon as I walk in here, I just got humbled real quick. And then because the university, like UNBC, really expanded, make sure I not only just focus on the timber valley, but learn the science and a lot of why questions. And then not only for the science, you also have like public engagement, like courses like this, ethics, and the stuff to make you thinking some of the really big challenges that forestry industry is facing right now. And then so like all the extra skills he gained for the 2 years I was here, it was fascinating. And not just the knowledge for forestry, how the forest ecosystem work, but also all the soft skills, like the communication, presentation, talking to professor like this. So it's been a fascinating learning experience here. So I guess thank you for designing this program and making everything so nice.
I can't take all the credit. A lot of that went to the chairs that went before me, like Kathy Lewis, and the people who've been instrumental in sort of steering that ethos right from the early 90s. So Staffan Lindgren, Kathy Lewis, and a bunch of the other sort of professors that went before us. Like we're just kind of building off of things that other people imagined and envisioned. And that was when the university started. It gave us an open plate to just say, we're going to reinvent this, right? And I think that was what the excitement of coming to be here as a faculty member was like.
Right.
But it's also something that is really innovative approached for the students that come in as well, right? And I think you hit it dead on. Like in your first couple of years in a tech program, or even here, we focus a lot on the how, right? How do you do this? How do you measure this stuff? How does the industry work? And it's a sort of second half where you kind of transition between a forest technologist who needs to know the mechanics and the how to do this, to the forester, which is where you understand the why of what we're kind of doing. Like, why is it set up like that? How could we modify it to adapt to changing ecosystems, shifts in the forest industry? And that's really that next step of becoming a forester, is understanding the underlying why, like why we're doing this and how to shift, right? Because if the forest industry doesn't shift, it's not going to survive, right? And so how do we keep a sustainable forest industry in a changing environment. And that's kind of the tools we're trying to give students as they sort of make that next step to becoming foresters.
Right. And I love that every moment here. So, well, let's talk about your lab.
Sure.
We just have a limited amount of time, so we kind of want to go through this. And so we know you have you run the avian behavior conservation research lab.
Yeah.
And people call them the cave.
Yeah, the bird cave.
The bird cave.
Yeah, and that's kind of a colloquial thing. The first about 7 years that I was here, we got a big reshuffling around in the lab buildings, and our lab got allocated to a lab down in the basement that was in a big windowless room at the end of a long kind of dark hallway.
Yeah.
And so people started calling it the cave, just, because it was a good place. We had lots of fun. We had, good lighting in the room, but it was cave-like. And so people started calling it the cave.
The cave, yeah.
And somebody came up with, it's the bird cave, like as around the bat cave.
Yeah.
And the name kind of stuck. We actually got a lab upstairs with big windows and stuff, but everybody still calls it the cave. So,
and I'm actually just researching some of the study that you guys are doing in your lab, and there's one very specific one that we're super interested in knowing is you have a PhD student is researching the difference between a natural, which is the fire, post-fire structure versus the human, maybe the logging, the post-harvest structure, and then compare them. And then kind of like how birds and small mammal response to those.
Yeah.
How much you can tell me about that research?
Sure. It's got a little bit. We ended up not doing a huge amount of the post-fire stuff, integrating it into it, but most of it is based around a big study that Che Elkin, who's one of the forestry professors and sort of is the chair of the forestry curriculum committee.
Shout out to Che.
Yeah, shout out to Che. But Che got the university into this big international kind of research program called the Adaptive Silviculture for Climate Change.
The John Prince.
Yeah, at the John Prince. And so what happens is across all of the networks that are taking part of this, most of them are in the U.S., there's a couple in Canada. UNBC, I think, is one of the most northerly sites on it. They've set up replicate sites that are kind of identical in terms of their size and things. And what they're doing is they're looking at different silvicultural practices to see how forests rebound in light of climate change over the next 20 to 30 years. So what they did is they harvested them all at one time.
Yeah.
And they did different harvesting regimes. So they did typical clear cuts. They have forest controls, so untouched controls, but then they have a bunch of different partial cut layers where they leave different amounts of basal area. So 5 meters per hectare, 10 and 15 meters per hectare.
Yeah. And
they went through and did this with harvesters and feller bunchers and things like this so that they could really control it out. And they use different kind of regimes, so they sort of thin from above versus thin from below, and you've got different treatments that are using seed tree type of ideas, and shelter woods, and then what they're doing is then they went in and they actually started to replant, but they replanted some of the sites with replacing them with what they took out. They had other ones where they were kind of replaced with more like cedar and things like that they're looking at. Is the climate going to become hotter, wetter, or is it going to become hotter, drier? And so they looked at like planting things that are more like Williams Lake type of ecosystem, to see whether that responds better over the next 20 years versus the interior cedar hemlock if it becomes more wet and stuff. So they have all these different kind of treatment types. And what our role in it is mostly looking at how the birds and small mammals adapt, especially to the cut regime, because we're right at the very beginning of it. So it's
Yeah.
more in the, does a partial cut system work better to retain species than a clear cut? And how does the amount of coarse woody debris you leave behind actually affect this? So I've actually got one PhD student who's focusing on that, another one who's kind of focusing on sort of biodiversity over a bigger landscape in the same area. And what we're actually looking at is if we look at the different partial cuts, do we see more of those forest species that you get in the control? Do we see those more in the high leaf retention cut sites? And where do we start to see them drop off in that continuum of clear cut through mature forest? And what do we see in the the low retention sites? Are they more similar to a clear cut, or do they have more retention so that you're actually getting a mix of open country species or early seral forest species with the mature forest species and things like this? And like one of the big ones that we're finding is the amount of coarse woody debris you leave behind also seems to attract a lot of animals and birds and things. So
even birds. Hey?
Yeah, so you get more. And even in clear cuts, if you leave the non-commercial trees, so if you leave a lot of the aspens instead of just removing them, they create habitat for things like woodpeckers, and those are real keystone species, so that the woodpeckers create cavities, and that suddenly becomes high use for secondary cavity users like nuthatches and chickadees and squirrels and flying squirrels and all sorts of things. Even owls will kind of get into those once they get rotted out and things like that.
Fisher maybe use those.
Oh yeah, fishers and stuff like that. So how you kind of manage the forest can actually affect a lot of the species that you retain in there. So that's what the focus of Kara's work is. And then my other PhD student, Sunny, is looking at a sort of the broader ecosystem that is around the research forest, and how the different kind of cut regimes that they've done over history are feeding in, and even fire scars and things like that are feeding into a bigger biodiversity aspect around the research forests.
Yeah, this is super interesting because as a forestry student, the biggest reason I came back to school is to learn like how like human disturbance impact on the biodiversity or animal behaviors. So this is such an interesting topic, and I really want to talk more if I have more time. But maybe do you take undergrad thesis still? Probably not.
Do I take students on? Yeah. No, I take students on. I don't have any. I don't have much in terms of field work available this year, simply because my chair duties are kind of taken a lot of time away from that. So I'm starting to wind down my projects to try and keep them manageable while I'm still sort of overseeing the department. Yeah. But yeah, I still take on honors students and things like that. So
should chat more later.
Yes. Yeah, chat more later. So
okay, and maybe just a little brief introduction of being a chair. Like maybe just bring us behind the curtain. Like what is a chair? What do you do? And the biggest challenge that you're facing as a chair versus a professor.
I mean, as a professor, you pretty much, you might be involved in some like curriculum. You'll be on curriculum committees, so you'll be kind of looking at individual degrees and how the degree is kind of structured. And there's a lot of planning, kind of like, why do we have all these different courses in this degree structure? Like, why do you have required courses? And it's like each one of those courses is kind of sort of targeted to hit certain competencies that you need for being a forester, right?
Yeah.
And so we have a lot of kind of meetings of like, what are you teaching in your class? Okay, I'm covering this, you're covering that. So there's a lot of that kind of planning that goes behind the scenes if you are a professor, right? But as the chair, I'm the one who kind of oversees that, and I oversee it for the forestry degree, the biology degree, the wildlife and fisheries, the conservation science and practice, and the nature-based tourism degree. And I also am the one who assigns all the professors to which courses they're going to be teaching,
Nice.
and I coordinate this with other chairs in the faculty, and so we have like I kind of my job is to basically make sure that everything kind of
Works.
runs,
Yeah.
right? And so I'm doing a lot more of that administrative planning type of stuff, right? And this gets down to things like course scheduling, right? So I have to tell, provide the registrar with who's going to be instructing what courses and what do they need for, classrooms, and what caps should be on the course and that kind of stuff. And then I have to go through the draft schedules to make sure that there's a minimal amount of conflict between the classes and adjust those kind of things behind the scene. If we have faculty that are on sabbatical, I have to find other people to come in and teach those courses. And so, I'm a lot of the behind the scenes, making sure everything runs, and also providing mentorship to the faculty, because we got a lot of new faculty. Um, you know, one of the problems with having this kind of university that started 30 years ago is we all came in.
Yeah.
Well, we're all 30 years older.
Yeah.
So a
Yeah.
lot of us are retiring. So in the last 10 years, we have probably replaced half of the department, and we're probably the biggest department on campus. We have about 30 faculty, and we've replaced about 15 in the past 10 years alone. And we've got 3 new job searches going on right now, right? So we have 3 new faculty members that we're trying to hire in over the next 2 months. And, it's just a constant rotation, because many of us are starting to get to the end of our careers and need to be replaced. So there's a lot of then mentorship that goes on with new faculty members.
Yeah, sounds a lot of work. On top of that, you also teach
Yeah.
and lecturing and doing research. I can't believe it's a hard job to do as a chair.
It is a balancing act, but it's a balancing act for all faculty. Like, one of the things we always tell new faculty is there's a huge amount of demands, because you got to do your teaching, you've got to maintain your research. You also have to do this, what's called service, which means basically helping, run the university and being on committees and overseeing bodies and stuff like that. And all of us have to do a little bit of that. We have, requirements to help our professional things. Like, I spent 6 years in presidency of the Canadian ornithologists, right? And so you have obligations to your professional body, as well as your as well as the university, to sort of make sure that everything's kind of keeping going.
Right.
And so it's always a balancing act. And just sort of as you move up to become chair and you do a bit more leadership, or you become a dean or something, it's just more of a balancing act, right? So it's and sometimes I do it really well. I still have about 100 unread emails in my inbox. So sometimes it falls down. It can be challenging at times, but it's how the university functions.
Speaking of those emails, I bet a lot of them, myself included. So because we are transfer students
Yeah.
to UNBC, and then as a transfer student, we have some field experiences, working in the field. And then for forest ecology and management, we're required to go to the field school in the summertime. It's about 2 week. It's a 2-week thing in the summertime, and then we saw the curriculum that is, we're gonna go do row layout. We're just like, what? We do this for a living, and now we have to spend money and make less money in the summer, and then go do this in the field school. So many of us was trying everything we could. So emailing Emily. Shout out to Emily. Emily is the academic advisor for the Faculty of Environment. She's super helpful, very knowledgeable, very, very just a great human to help you go through your time at UNBC.
I'll always say thank you to Emily. We are massively lucky to have this woman, and we want to keep her forever, right?
We highly appreciate that, and I love her so much.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we talked to Emily, trying to get out of the field school, and it's a lot of the emails coming from students trying to fight for credits, try to get out of the field school.
Yeah.
And I actually read a email that you sent to one of the students to explain why the field school is important, and I appreciate that, and I completely understand why it's important now. But I kind of wanted to put this on the podcast. Do you mind explain one more time that why this field school is important and why this technical working experience might not fit the learning outcome that designed for the field school?
Yeah, and I think part of it is our fault because we colloquially call it field school, and it's really not. It's field research in natural resource management, and it's a capstone course for the degree. It's actually one of the key things that actually distinguishes the UNBC degree as a unique degree in the country, and it's actually recognized by the Canadian Forestry Accreditation Board, who oversee adjudicating our school to get professional accreditation for forestry, and
Right.
and they basically are like, this course is unique in the country, and they actually recommend that nobody get credit for it. But it's really different because what we're doing in that course, you take it right before you go into fourth year. That's the intention.
Yeah.
So it's taken like the 2 weeks literally before your fourth year term starts.
Yeah.
And it is supposed to take everything that you have learned up to that point and sort of take it into the field and try and apply it. So it's not just how does a road get built. It's how do you balance things like road building with, not just kind of making sure you have minimal erosion and stuff like that, but basically taking into consideration the fact that if you build a road into an area, suddenly you've increased access into that area for all sorts of, invasive predators, ungulates, snowmobilers, all that kind of stuff. And how do you balance that off? How do you oversee the ecosystem that you are working with? So a lot of it is, there's very little where you're kind of going to go out and say, okay, this is how you set up a block. It is more like, this is a forest that we are trying to manage to be sustainable for the next couple of 100 years. And it utilizes two of our research forests. One is 10,000 hectares and the other is 15,000 hectares. And it is, how do you manage something that big as a something that fits everything, indigenous requirements and indigenous maintenance? So how do you balance, like, how do you balance this sort of indigenous perspective, recreational perspectives, just general forest aesthetics perspectives, overall ecology, manage the wildlife. So all the modules are interconnected about looking at a massive landscape and how you balance that. And it's utilizing working community forests, and it's talking about how you manage that forest. One of those forests, the John Prince Research Forest, is co-managed between the Clasden First Nation and UNBC. Well, it's actually the Clasden and the Binchi First Nations now, and so how do you sort of balance all of those things and still have a working forest that is generating revenue, but is simultaneously maintaining biodiversity and recreational values and aesthetic values and traditional values in that broader landscape. And ironically, the BC government has just changed their whole forest practices code to, you now have to put together these land use management plans that are exactly that. Like, your harvest block has to now be situated into an ecosystem level classification rather than just how do you manage that block, right?
Yeah.
And so they caught up about 20 years after we started doing this. So we call it field school simply, or field camp, because it's in the field, right?
Yeah.
But it's really kind of, how do you take all of this work that you are doing and now actually do it in a practical sense in a field and see demonstrations of how it's being done and how it's being managed on a landscape level.
Yeah, and I actually talked to Roy. Shout out to Roy too. Shout out to a lot of people today.
Yeah.
He basically runs the field camp, and then we had a lot of chat about because I'm taking that this summer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna document the whole thing, filming the whole thing, maybe do a podcast with them, sitting down, maybe with some of the guide outfitters and trappers that are working in those areas, and then have some talks. I feel like it's gonna be beneficial for forestry students.
Yeah, I mean, interestingly enough, whenever we talk to forestry companies, they all want people that have gone through the forestry camp. We actually get requests from the forestry companies to allow their people to come on the forestry camp, and they all want to do modules on the forestry camp. So we're kind of like, we need to change this ethos of students thinking that this is the same as the school you've gone to where you have a 200-hectare block that they go out and teach you. That's a block, right?
Yeah.
This is now a landscape, right, that you're working with, and it's like, how do all of these blocks integrate together over a 50 200-year rotation schedule, and how do you kind of keep that whole balance going, right?
Yeah.
And how do you interconnect the landscape so that you always have certain amounts of mature forest and continuity on the landscape? It's a much bigger thing. The forest companies are so keen on it that I'm kind of starting to get to the point. It's like, you guys should sponsor students to go to
I won't say no.
I won't say no. I kind of was like, you should release your students for the 2 weeks and say you'll pay for them to go to field camp if they sign a contract with you to stay on. We get requests from the forestry companies to start pitching to our students to hire them a year. Like, usually if they're trying to hire for the following summer, we start getting the requests to get access to our students in June of the year before. Like, it's so, like, almost everybody could walk into a job that they want, right? And it's because the training that we get for our students is really well known, right? And companies are really desperately looking for those students. So
exactly. So yeah, I'm actually really looking. I transformed from, a big, like trying to get out of this field school, but right now I'm really looking forward for that.
Yeah,
I'm like trying to really go see what's going on, and then talking to those.
Once we usually explain it to students, they're like, no, I want to do that, right?
Yeah.
They're kind of like, they see it's the same kind of thing that they've done. Most of those things that they have done are courses that we actually, if you came here straight to do a forestry degree, they're covered in like first year and second year courses, and we just do those out behind the university because there's a big forest out there. Right. But this is more of a bigger experiential course that kind of summarizes everything and kind of compiles everything that you're learning into one big package. Right.
Awesome. You had a town hall meeting last year, basically talking about, because again, as a forest ecology and management students, you need to graduate by either doing a professional report or a thesis. So the report is about like a 1 semester thing. The thesis is a 2 semester thing, but if you do a thesis, normally come with a like an honor.
You can apply for an honors degree if you do a thesis. That's if you do your undergraduate degree and add on an honors thesis, then you can apply to graduate with honors. And it's just like an acknowledgement that you have done. You have done that next step. Like, with the difference between an undergraduate report and an honors thesis or an undergraduate thesis is an undergraduate thesis requires you to have original data that you have not necessarily collected, because some people work with historic data and things like that, but you've taken data, you've analyzed it, you've produced like new science with it, and you have actually gone through a formalized process of presenting that and defending that research. And a lot of students publish their undergraduate thesis. Doing an undergraduate report is not necessarily any less strenuous, but it doesn't require you to have original data. It can be set up in a manner that is more akin to, if you were working as a professional forester, you would have to do, you would get assigned to do professional reports. And that might be something like doing a review and analysis of new harvesting techniques. So you could do something like, what's the utility of doing adaptive silviculture as an undergraduate report, and you would be weighing the pros and cons of different techniques that people have tried, but it's more like a literature review that then has a big analysis and synthesis. So it's not like a term paper that you would hand in. It's more just like a review of this is what's been done.
Yeah.
It's more of this is what's been done. You have to think about it from a perspective of like a professional activity. You've been given this report by your company. They want to know whether it's useful, like whether it's worth their while to be doing these kind of new treatments. And so you're kind of taking an advocacy role of, I think that we should do this, or I think we should do this, and basing it up with why you think that is done. And you can actually have a lot of influence on things like policy by doing these kind of technical reports. So a lot of us do both. We publish scientific papers. We also write reports for government agencies and things like that. Magazine, yeah, any of those things, so that we can actually influence policy, right? Yeah. And so they're just two different ways. You're required to do this. It's actually a requirement of accreditation that you have that professional level report, and it's basically supposed to be showing what you have learned over a 4-year period, and being able to show that you could step out into a professional, research component or professional working environment and actually perform at that level. And a lot of students will actually, if they're working on a forestry report, if you work with a faculty member where they're working with government agencies or things like that, you can do your report and submit it to, you submit it for marks and stuff, get all the feedback, and then you turn it around and actually submit it to a, Ministry of Forest or something like that. That report can then actually act as the example of professional level publication that you can use to get your RPF. Right. So, it's really worthwhile sort of really diving in regardless of which one you choose. Right. And sometimes people want to do the 2-semester thesis. Other people just want to do the report. It doesn't mean that one is better or worse than the other. It's more a matter of, what is going to work for you? How is it going to fit into your time schedule? And you can really pour. I've seen some professional reports that are just stellar, right? And they go off to the ministry, and we get these, this was amazing, and stuff like that. I've had students do those working with me at like we had ones where we were assessing bird movement around the airport, and it actually is used by the airport authority to, how they manage the airport so that they have less bird strikes, right? So,
Crazy.
Stuff like this. So you can actually have a really big influence using, using a report or an independent studies to sort of really deep dive into a particular topic area.
Right. Yeah, and then the honors degree.
Yeah.
Just one last question, actually.
Yeah.
So what, because from my understanding, if you're not going to grad school, like it's actually not going to help you down the road.
It's not,
right?
An honors degree. A lot of students use the honors degree and think that the honors degree is required to get into grad school. It's not. Like you can get into grad school with just a regular major's degree, and you can get into grad school by doing reports instead of a thesis. But if students are really interested in going into that research sort of side of things, then having an honors degree kind of is an indication that you have done an independent research project, and it's recognized by other schools and by other faculty at other places as, okay, well, this person's got an honors degree, so they must have done a thesis. If you don't have that and you're applying to grad school, you just show them copies of your report, right? Because that's the same kind of level of quality that we expect. The only distinction is it doesn't it doesn't exclude it, but it doesn't require you to have independent data
Right.
to do that. It can be more review analysis. And so we have lots of students who graduate with their just doing a professional report that decide later to go on to graduate studies, and they don't have any problems.
Gotcha. Yeah, and that's all the questions I have. Is there anything else you want to talk about maybe on this podcast?
No, I'm really just happy that you're doing these things. I think it's a great idea, and it's a great way for us to sort of be able to disseminate out information as well to new students who might be interested in coming.
Yeah, and then we're starting with the faculty, like our own people in school, and we're slowly going to expand into like the ministry, the industry, and then like research from other places, from the government, and really just platforms to facilitate conversation and having people talk.
And as a chair, if you need me to sort of point to people and say, "Hey, you need to do this,"
yeah, I won't say no to those offers for sure. All right, so that wraps up the second episode of the podcast. We thank you for tuning in and spending time listening to us chit chat about nature, BC Forestry, and lives at UNBC. And UNBC Forestry Club Podcast is a student-led podcast sponsored by absolutely nobody, but a bunch of students who are passionate about forestry, the outdoors, the adventure. New episodes drop every week, hopefully. So stay tuned for more insightful conversation and inspiring stories. Until next time, let's continue to grow together, rooted in our love for the forest. Have a good week, and we will see you in the next one.